long as people have been tailgating. They've been doing it with Dr. Pepper. Watching college football without a delicious Dr. Pepper is like watching the game at home without throwing a party, or even worse, throwing a party on game day without a Dr. Pepper. If college football is the quarterback, Dr. Pepper's its favorite wide receiver. That's right, the same Dr. Pepper you can pick up at Dollar General, take home, and watch your football team with. Dr. Pepper at college football. It's a one-of-a-kind tradition.
Houston has an offense that's among the most explosive in the nation. Florida State's defense ranks 5th in points allowed. They go head-to-head in the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl, 11:30 Eastern New Year's Eve on ESPN Radio.
Let's come back with a W. We're out of here. Let's go.
This is Championship Drive.
Keep running the ball. Keep running the ball. That's it, Southbuck.
Your host today, Zubin Mehenti.
Straight out of the Championship Drive podcast, we have been talking the Heisman to death. We do so at this time each and every year. But our Michael Wilbon brings a point to the table that is rarely brought to the table. We'll see if you think he has any merit in his comments. A couple of coaches get extensions or will stay. And will we stay with the format of allowing sub-500 teams in bowls? Plenty to talk about here on the Championship Drive podcast with Ivan Maisel and Heather Dinich. I am Zubin Mehenti. Phil Steele will be along the way as well. Hey, guys.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Plenty to talk about it. Let's get it going right away.
Time to come out of the tunnel on Championship Drive.
So we know more than one sub-500 team will be bowling. It's not something that a lot of people are proud of. The NCAA has tried to say, look, we're rewarding teams for graduating players, essentially saying schools with high APRs are going to be given the opportunity to get those slots. Of the 80 bowl slots, 77 were filled. They needed 3 under 500 teams. They got them. And for a lot of those programs, particularly somebody like Nebraska with the first-year head coach, it certainly seems like it would be an advantage. Get some extra practices, the 15 extra practices, get to know your team a little bit better. When you're a team like Nebraska or anybody with a first-year head coach or somebody that can really use those extra repetitions, it's not so much maybe about the game itself, but about the process continuing with your team. This has garnered a lot of criticism, but Ivan, to be honest with you, as the number of bowl games grow, this just seems to be something that might be unavoidable, so people probably just need to get with the program and just accept it.
Well, yeah, Zubin, I think we're all between a rock and a hard place here, and I don't say that because we work for ESPN and we own a lot of the bowl games. The NCAA is I think gun shy about limiting the marketplace because they've been to court one too many times. But I think it is. I think we have reached a point where we have too many. I mean, it's common sense. If you say a bowl is to reward for good play, and then you're trolling for 5 and 7 teams, then I guess we all need to redefine what the mission of the bowl game is. And if we do that, that's fine. But then I think you diminish the bowl games. So I think it's a bit of a mess, and I think they would be wise to figure out some way to limit the number. But I'm not an antitrust lawyer, so I don't know how to do it.
Heather, what do you think?
Well, Ivan nailed it, and NCAA President Mark Emmert pretty much asked that question of the members of the NCAA, what is the point of a bowl game? And he asked, is it a reward for a successful season, or is it just another game that we're going to provide an opportunity for? And coaches, like you mentioned, love it because of those extra practices. Love it. When Duke started going back to a bowl game under Cutcliffe, that was something that he talked about a lot. So there is that opportunity, but, personally, I think it's watered down, and it should be more of a reward to me for a successful season. And I was thinking of, the hashtag, you have one job, win 6 games. Okay? It shouldn't be... it shouldn't be a reward for mediocrity, which is exactly what a 5 and 7 season is.
Indeed.
I will say this though.
Yeah.
Is there anything better like when we get to whatever day the bowls start, and every time you turn the television on, there's a football game on.
True.
I mean, is that a great country or what? So I'm a little.
No, if there is one intended benefit of it, I guess it would be that. But you're right; it is an opportunity, and it's just semantics. I mean, what do you really want a bowl game to be? Is it really a reward, like you said, Ivan, or is it just another example of our country's obsession with football, where instead of saying less is more and context means something and it really has value, is it simply just a case of more is more? And I think we might be getting to that point. So Heather said you got one job to win 6 games. Well, Dana Holgerson won 7. He did better than that. He goes 7-5. But Ivan, I remember a day you and I were on the Championship Drive podcast here. I want to say Holgerson joined us. They were 3-0, but you were very leery. You said, wait a minute. They haven't started Big 12 play yet. And unfortunately, that's right when the calendar turned from September to October. And when it did, West Virginia really paid the price. They went 7-5, but yesterday their AD there at Morgantown, Shane Lyons, made the announcement that he would be back. He did the dreaded evaluation of the football program and decided that 7-5 and 35 and 28 since his hiring in 2011 was enough. I think he's done a good job. I think they play an exciting brand of football. I know they need a travel partner. The assimilation to the Big 12 has been okay. I think they tend to play a brand of football that's a little bit closer to prototypical Big 12 football for an outsider. I think TCU did a nice job in sort of moving in that direction as well. I'm not exactly sure what the ceiling is for a place like this, Ivan, but I think he's done more than enough to at least get another crack here.
Yeah, and isn't it weird, Zubin, that we're congratulating Shane Lyons for doing what we all 5-10 years ago just would have been assumed,
Right.
But what's the marketplace now? If somebody, you got a guy at LSU that wins 10 games and they want to run him off, and so we're all really impressed. When West Virginia decides to keep a successful coach. I mean, they are the second tier. They're on the second tier of the league. They've been on the second tier in the league most of his tenure, but they're not unsuccessful. So it's a prudent thing to not blow up a program and start over, and they realize that. So he gets another shot.
Heather, fair?
Those teams you look at those teams that they lost to, and they're all ranked the best teams in the Big 12, and 3 of those 4 games were on the road. I'm talking about the October stretch, and everybody kind of eyed that. We all knew it was coming as the tough stretch, and we talked about it on the podcast. Oklahoma State, Baylor, TCU, that's your October. Good luck with that to anybody.
No, that's fair. Another coach that basically got some good news is Sonny Dykes. He gets an extension. The best news may have belonged to Dabo Swinney, who picked up the Coach of the Year. We got the Home Depot College Football Awards tonight, and there's going to be the circuit of awards coming through here over the next several days. What's interesting here, and we're going to have a couple of classic sound bites throughout this Championship Drive podcast. This one is first on the notion that even though they're the number 1 team each and every week, from the people that matter the most, the people that Heather covers, the College Football Playoff Ranking Committee, even though they've been won wire to wire in the mind of Jeff Long and company, wait for it, they're still not getting respect.
You got people out there that it's like, I guess Clemson's not supposed to do this or not supposed to do that. And we've heard a lot of, I think our guys are used to hearing a lot of that rhetoric. We're kind of like the rednecks that move into the nice neighborhood, and everybody's like, who the heck are these people coming in here? But we belong right where we are.
That's Dabo Swinney from Mike and Mike, apparently saying his football team is the Beverly Hillbillies. That's not an old enough reference there, but thank you. I'll be here all week. Actually, I'll just be here today. But seriously, Heather, they're the number 1 team in the country. I don't think they're getting a lack of respect. In fact, I think they've earned more respect here in the last year than they have in their entire ascension, that adjective notwithstanding that Dabo gets very upset about when anybody in the media utters. I understand you want to fire your kids up and they're 18 to 22, but I think even at this point it's going to be hard to sell to their team that they're being disrespected.
Well, considering their spot in the committee's rankings, yes, but I do agree that there is still a sentiment out there that Clemson's going to lose. It's like when you look at what they've accomplished a school record 13 wins, the only undefeated team in the FBS. They won their last 16 games. We were talking about Florida State having the longest active win streak in the FBS. It's Clemson now that owns it, okay? 5 straight games at a neutral site since they lost 70-33 to West Virginia at that Orange Bowl. I was at that Orange Bowl, and let me tell you something. Clemson has come light years from where it was that day. And I will never, ever forget standing there in the locker room after everybody had left, and Dabo, after that beatdown, was kind enough to stand there with me and do a video for ESPN.com. And ever since then, I've had a lot of respect for him. And considering what he's done since that point with that program, the hires he's made, and all of the investments that Dan Radakovich, their athletic director, has put into that program, Clemson is there. And anybody who doesn't think that it is hasn't been paying attention, because they have earned that number 1 spot. And I wouldn't be surprised if they kept it.
Heather, hadn't he suffered enough? I mean, what were you thinking?
Jinx. That's the HC jinx right there. They're done in the first round.
No, I have newfound respect for him as a redneck who moved into a Connecticut neighborhood 20 years ago. I'm all in with Clemson now. So
let me ask you this, Ive. The idea that they could go 15-0 for all the years you've been watching college football. I know, obviously, without the advent of the playoff and these conference championship games, the SEC championship game, which Dabo played in '92 for Alabama, that's only been around since '92. Just the idea in your vision of watching this game that somebody could finish at 15 wins, no losses. 15.
It's a great point, Zubin. It is astounding, because even if you look at what's the dominant dynasty in football right now? Is it Alabama? Nick Saban has had 1 unbeaten season.
Right.
In his 9 years at Alabama. They went 14-0 in 09. It's hard to do. It's hard to win every single week. And the fact that they've got the opportunity to do that should be celebrated. There's no question.
How about this, to tie it all together? Dabo, as I mentioned, was a wide receiver on the '92 Alabama team. They played in the inaugural SEC championship game that year. Are there lessons to be learned from his days as a player in '92 and being involved in the college football playoff in 2015?
There's been a lot of similarities for me personally this year, because I remember in '92 vividly. At that time, we were 10-0, 11-0, and we're number 2 in the country in Miami, sitting at home. They're number 1. They're going to be in the national championship game. And I remember Coach Gene Stallings, who was my coach. He was all mad because we got to go play in this thing called the SEC championship game. Nobody had ever heard of anything like that, and we got to play the fun and gun, 9-2 Florida Gators, Spurrier, and if we get beat, we're not going to be in the national championship. Here we are, 11-0, and we haven't won anything. And that was kind of I think the feeling last week going into that game. Here we are, 12-0, and man, we still got to go play another game just to have a chance to advance.
And that was Dabo again on Mike and Mike. And when you think about him complaining about being 11-0 and living on the brink, now they're 13-0, trying to get to 15-0. How much things have changed, guys. That interesting comment about we're like rednecks that moved into the nice neighborhood. That's one thing. And it's funny, and there's a little tongue-in-cheek nature for that. And then there's this. As you guys know, the Heisman Trophy is going to be awarded on Saturday. There are 3 finalists, Derrick Henry, Christian McCaffrey, and company are ready to go. I think a lot of people feel like Derrick Henry is going to be your runaway winner here, at least according to the Vegas odds. But Christian McCaffrey is different for one reason than all the other candidates. Yes, he's multidimensional. Yes, his father was a terrific football player at the school where he is now starring. Yes, he's in there with Barry Sanders and single-season lore, even passing Barry Sanders. But according to our Michael Wilbon, who was on Russillo and Cannell on ESPN Radio, there's another very obvious difference between McCaffrey and a lot of the other candidates, and no one's talking about it until now.
I would vote for McCaffrey if I had a ballot this year. There's no question about it. Because to me, I'm voting for the best all-around player. And in terms of running the ball, I mean, there's not even that much difference in the rushing totals alone, not to mention all the other things McCaffrey does to help his team. But that aside, the bigger cultural issue here is, yes, I think it will hurt McCaffrey. The last time there was a white running back who won the Heisman Trophy was 1973. And it's about stereotypes. It's about the stereotypes various people face in various industries. And so this is the one that Christian McCaffrey faces.
That was, again, Wilbon on Russillo and Cannell. I have a lot of respect for Wilbon. I'm not buying this. As you know, the three Heisman finalists, Derrick Henry, Deshaun Watson, both African-American, and McCaffrey, who is white, the son of Ed McCaffrey, the former Stanford standout at wide receiver. I understand there's some cultural things here. I also understand Toby Gerhart of Stanford was a Heisman finalist a few years ago. Yes, I understand he's not on the level of McCaffrey, and he was truly just kind of a bruising runner more than McCaffrey is a multidimensional sort of player. Ivan, you've been covering this game for a long time. I understand this is always going to come to the forefront with the white running back. I mean, this is just something you got to bring up when the white running back bursts onto the scene like this, but I'm not sure about this. I'm not in agreement with Wilbon on this.
No, I thought it was a white Stanford running back because of Gerhart and McCaffrey, so it shows you where I am. No, I think it's a non-issue. Gerhart was fascinating because his numbers were better than Mark Ingram, but everybody got caught up in the issue of Alabama had never won a Heisman Trophy, and Alabama was the best team in the country, and he was the offensive engine of that team. So that swept him to victory, even though Gerhart had better numbers. This is almost. I think McCaffrey was hurt more by the late starting times of Stanford's games than by whether he's white or African American. I think he sort of snuck up on people, and the fact that he had such a big game in prime time Saturday night against USC, I think has made this a lot closer race than anybody thought it would be.
Heather, what do you think?
I think the bigger problem is Alabama and its reputation and where the voters are coming from, how many voters are coming from the South and as opposed to the West Coast. I do think that Ivan mentioned, the start times, people don't always pay enough attention to the West Coast. And I think it's much easier to say, oh, well, Derrick Henry in Alabama. It's Alabama, as opposed to Christian McCaffrey playing for Stanford. I think that's a bigger uphill battle. I don't think race is the issue here. I think it's location and where the voters are coming from in history. But, look, I've had McCaffrey at the top of my ballot, which I don't technically have, for weeks, because I think he's the best player in the country.
Regionally, the vote is spread regionally, which is almost anachronistic in this day and age, I think. But the votes, there are 6 regions, each of which have 140 voters. And you could, logically, you could make the case that Deshaun Watson will dilute some of Derrick Henry's strength because they're from almost the same region. I don't know if that's the case. I think Heather's onto something with the fact that it's Alabama. And in Derrick Henry's defense, it's not just that he's the leading rusher in the country. It's that he was all the Alabama offense had, which became quite evident the last 2 games. So I think there's, it's an interesting race because it's not just a numbers race. It's almost like, what style do you like? What style of player do you like?
I think it's a great point. Now, let me ask you this. When the list came out that there was only going to be 3 invited to New York, I think some people were surprised. And people talk about a late charge and, Derrick Henry passing Herschel Walker and doing so in the Auburn game, the number of carries. And I think he was over 40 carries in that game and what he did in the SEC title game. And making all the arguments, McCaffrey, everything that he did, the late charge. Are you guys surprised based on that same sort of criteria? Late charge, a lot of people watching, bursting on. You guys surprised Baker Mayfield didn't make the trip?
Yeah.
I think there should be more than 3 guys going this year, though. I mean, there are more talented players right now, and I think it was on Monday's podcast that we talked about how it's not when we had Joe Tess on, and he was talking about more people are exposed now to more great players at different programs, just through the exposure that the sport gets now, and so you should realize that it's more than 3 deep, and Baker Mayfield did a terrific job for them. It's one of the biggest reasons they're in the top 4.
He did. I think, though, Heather, voting closed at 5 o'clock Eastern Monday, and they announced the finalists at 6 o'clock Eastern on Monday. So I think they looked at the accountants, whichever accounting firm it is, looked at the numbers and then told the Heisman Trust, here are your finalists. And they do those who have a reasonable chance to win. So that's how it was done before the electronic ballot and in the last couple of years of the electronic ballot, which the last couple of years I thought my memory is that the deadline was Wednesday. They pushed it back this year to Monday, and so I'm assuming they had all the numbers when they decided who the finalists were.
Oh, so you're saying that Mayfield, from a voting perspective, just simply didn't get enough votes to even warrant the trip?
That's what I think, and I haven't asked anybody at the Heisman that, but that's logic, given the fact that their criteria for the finalist who made the show was always with X number of ballots in, who has a chance to win.
Okay.
And this year they had all the ballots in before they announced the finalists. So, I'm thinking Mayfield will be a distant 4th.
Last thing,
5th or whatever.
Yeah, no. Last thing on this level of surprise, shock, stunned, mildly surprised. Level of surprise if Derrick Henry does not win.
Oh, I'd be surprised. I think he's the favorite. I think the point Heather made. I think that people who follow the game closely are going to give McCaffrey a more serious look than people who don't. And unfortunately, among the 900 and some odd voters of the Heisman, there are a lot of people who don't follow the game closely.
Does that bother you? Real quick, Heather, sorry to jump in there. Ivan, for being a historian of the game, this is the most prestigious award in all of amateur sports. Does it bother you that for an award of this ilk, there are so many people that vote that essentially don't follow the sport? I mean, that would just get at me if I was a competitor for this award, or if I was a fellow voter knowing that I was doing my due diligence on this.
Yeah, sure. No, it does. I think the voting body could be pared down considerably. It might be politically difficult to do that for the Heisman, but the way they run that thing, which is autocratically, I'm not sure they would really care if they decided they should do it, and I think they should.
It'll be interesting to see what happens. We'll find out on Saturday night. The Heisman Trophy is presented on ESPN. We're back in 1 minute with Phil Steele. The delicious, one-of-a-kind taste of Dr. Pepper and college football go way back. As long as people have been participating in their school traditions, they've been doing it with an ice-cold Dr. Pepper. For instance, Alabama, USC, and Colorado all have one-of-a-kind traditions that make us love Saturdays in the fall. Watching college football without the delicious Dr. Pepper is like watching the game at home without throwing a party. Or even worse, throwing a party on game day without a Dr. Pepper. Literally, since the national championship trophy is presented by Dr. Pepper. Dr. Pepper and college football. It's a one-of-a-kind tradition. I'm Eric Carabell, and the latest fantasy-focused baseball podcast with Tristan A. Starcroft. We talk about all the winter meetings, trades, and signings. Shelby Miller, Ben Zobrist, Davis Price, Rule 5 Draft. Find us at the Listen tab of the ESPN app or on iTunes. It's Thursday. That means Phil Steele is here, but instead of picking a plethora of games, we've got one game to pick, which really has less to do with the numbers overall, Phil, and more to do with the pageantry of Army, Navy, Saturday. And there was a good part of this season that Navy had a lot to play for. In some ways, they still do. I think their head coach has been talked about for a lot of reasons. Their quarterback's been talked about for a lot of reasons. Give us the numbers. Size up Army and Navy.
Well, it's one of my favorite games to watch each and every year. And, unfortunately, not if you're a Navy fan, but Navy's won 13 in a row in the series. I remember when this series used to be a 50-50 split. One team would win one year and the series would even out. But Navy has been favored in all 13 games This is only the second time, however, that there's been a team that's more than a 3-touchdown favorite. The other time was 2003. Navy was minus 21.5, and they won that game 34-6. Now, Coach Niumatalolo is the all-time winningest coach at Navy now. He passed George Wells. Keenan Reynolds will be the all-time touchdown leader. I wish he would have been in the Heisman for New York, at least gotten an invite there. Navy's 9-2 this year. They're outgaining their opponents by 51 yards per game against a tougher schedule. Army's just 2-9 against a very weak schedule. My computer calls this Navy 42-13, but this is a rivalry game, and sometimes you got to throw those computer numbers out, and this is one of those cases. You know, in the last 6 years, Navy's only outgained Army by 9 yards per game. Hard to believe with the fact they've been winning all those games. And keep in mind, both teams face the option every day in practice, so the defenses usually have the advantage. And to give you an example, both played Air Force this year. The scores were 33-11 and 20-3. Now, in the last 9 years, these teams have averaged a combined 36 points per game, and the total here is 51. In fact, the highest scoring game in the last 9 years, 48 points. When I watch this game, I always root for the underdog because I'd like to see that streak end, but I like the under as my top play here, under 51.
Hey, Phil, before I ask you about the Heisman, what you just said about throwing or tossing your computer numbers aside, is that the case with all rivalries, or is that special to Army-Navy?
I would say there are a few rivalries that you could do that on. Not all of them, but Army-Navy is definitely one of those. So usually your top rivalries in the country you could do that for, and I think Army-Navy's there.
Yeah, no, it's a great show, and if anybody ever has a chance to see the game, wherever it is, then drop whatever you're doing and go see it. But and it's the first half of what's become a great mid-December doubleheader in college football because the Heisman's that night. What do you think about the three finalists, and how do you see the race going?
Well, I think in many years, any one of these three would walk away with the Heisman because all three you could make a great case for any of them. Now, I will say that this year ends in the number 5, so that generally means it goes to a running back. At least it has every year in the Heisman, and it looks like it might be that way this year. Deshaun Watson averaged 269 yards per game total offense the first 7. He was sort of coming off that injury. You wondered if he'd be healthy, but he exploded down the stretch. 429 yards per game. I said in the magazine Clemson would be a national title contender if he stayed healthy, but I had that question. He answered it and trumped it. He's the quarterback on the number 1 team in the country. I can see why he's up there. Now, one thing I've been hearing, Christian McCaffrey and the all-purpose yard record, I really, in my mind, I count bowls because, the bowls happen. And if you do that, Barry Sanders still holds the record. McCaffrey will break it in the bowl game. But Sanders, including the Holiday Bowl, had 3,526 yards. He did it in 12 games, so he averaged 293.8 yards per game. McCaffrey's got 3,496 yards in 13 games, so he's averaging about 25 yards per game less, but he'll get there because of the fact he's got more, and he does technically hold the record because the NCAA doesn't count bowl games before 80, but I don't understand why. He is coming off an amazing performance in his final game, 461 yards. A lot of folks didn't watch him all year. Now, if you did, he didn't do that every week. He had 461 yards there. He had 171 against Northwestern, 244 against Oregon, 228 against Notre Dame. Good, but those are all-purpose numbers I'm throwing out there. So we go to the final candidate, Derrick Henry. You know, Henry at 7 o'clock, I think you could hand him the Heisman, 7 o'clock Eastern time, because he did what he had to do. He had 44 attempts, 189 yards against Florida's top 5 defense, and then McCaffrey and Watson thrilled everybody around the country to reopen that race. Now, the previous week, he rushed 46 times for 271 yards to beat Auburn. He topped 200 yards against LSU, Mississippi State, A&M. He'll top 2,000 yards in the bowl. I thought he was a leader coming into the day on Saturday. Didn't do anything to lose it. So I think when all the votes are tallied, it'll be close. I think in ranking them, I believe it'll be Henry, McCaffrey, and Watson. But any one of the three deserves the award.
Yeah, so I don't think anybody would be surprised if Derrick Henry walked away with it. But what would be a surprise, what was a surprise, is how much coaching turnover there was, not just this postseason, but in the middle of the season. We wanted to ask you what coaching hires you liked now that the dust has settled.
I'm going to give you three that I like a lot, and then one that I really don't like and don't understand. But I'll start with the ones I like. And we'll go with Dino Babers going to Syracuse. And but when he goes to Syracuse, he's stepping into a very good situation because I thought that given the circumstances of what he had to deal with injury-wise, that Scott Schaefer did a pretty decent job. I mean, he kept losing his quarterbacks, defensive line, and offensive line. They've been the most banged-up team in college football the last 2 years, and it shows in the record. But Babers is a no-nonsense guy, should benefit from better health. You have to because they can't be that banged up every year. And I think there's a decent amount of talent there, and I think he'll have Syracuse turned around quickly. I love his offense that he's incorporated. So I think Dino Babers going to bring high energy level, offensive explosion, and as long as they get better health, I think he'll have good success at Syracuse. Another one sort of sneaky that a lot of people scratch their heads about is Bill Cubit given a 2-year contract at Illinois. Now, I'm telling you, Bill Cubit has an excellent football mind. He's a great motivator. No one would touch him as a head coach because he's 62 years old. So that's too old. But this was the perfect storm for him. Here he was, the coordinator, a very good coordinator for Illinois. And now he's able to take over this job for a couple of years, get it pointed in the right direction. And I think Bill Cubit's actually going to have more success than a lot of folks believe. So it's not one of those splash hires. It's not one of those hires for 10 years from now. But I think Bill Cubit is a very good hire at Illinois at this time. I'm also going to go with Mark Richt at Miami of Florida. And Miami was one of the most disappointing teams this year, despite the fact they ended up with a decent record. I mean, Miami finished the year at 8-4, but I think that they could have done more. I think when you have Rick come in, he was getting a little stale there at Georgia. It's not going to be stale here at Miami. This is his alma mater. I think he is one of the better head coaches out there. He's an outstanding recruiter. He's in the state of Florida. He'll bring the talent in. There's a good amount of talent there right now, so I think they'll have good success. And you look at the division they're playing in, the Coastal, that's a division that can be won on a yearly basis. And so I think Mark Richt is going to come in and do a very good job at Miami. Now, the worst one for me was East Carolina, and that's one I'm really scratching my head on. You know, Ruffin McNeil, I thought was a tremendous guy. He's a guy that was an East Carolina alum. He lived and breathed East Carolina. I thought he had the excitement level turned around. This year, coming into the year, I thought he had a very good quarterback in Kurt Benkert. He got lost in the preseason. He suffered another quarterback loss, and some close games they lost during the course of the year. It was an expected rebuilding year. They didn't have a lot of returning starters. He's brought passion to the fans. He's brought an exciting game to the field. I was just absolutely shocked when I learned that they fired Ruffin McNeil.
Yeah, no question about it. There was some, there was a bit of traction to almost get him rehired. I know those things never quite work, those letter writing campaigns and those signatures, but it caught a lot of people off guard. He did a great job. He lost Carden and Hardy, but he's done a wonderful job. He's an alum. Like I said, 1-5-7 season. The AD said he just didn't like the trajectory of the program, which makes you wonder what kind of the expectations really are there in Greenville. I'm with you. He did a really, really good job. And Bill, I guess somebody else might hire a pretty good coach if he's out there, right?
Yeah, but they won't get the same guy because it's not he's not an alum at the other place. But he lived at, it sort of reminds me of Baylor. And I'll go back to when Baylor fired Chuck Reedy. All Reedy did was get Baylor to bowl games year after year after year. They were competing with Texas on a yearly basis. They had a down year. They had a rebuilding year. They suffered a lot of injuries. They had a losing season. They fired Chuck Reedy. Baylor football went into the abyss for about the next 10, 15 years. They became the worst team in the Big 12 by far. And I hope it doesn't turn out that way for East Carolina.
No, and keep in mind, the last thing I would say about McNeil is that he tutored a guy named Lincoln Riley, who's doing some pretty good things himself in Norman. Phil, thanks a lot. We'll see you next week.
All right. Great talking to everybody.
Hashtag walk-ons.
All right. Here we do it every day on the podcast. It's a chance for you to interact with us. We appreciate the download, but more than that, you can have a voice on the program. You got a question? Send it in using the hashtag walk-ons. We'll do our best to answer it. Josh, what do we have today?
We got a bunch of good ones today, like this one from Jason Miller, who's at J Miles Miller, and Jason asks this question to Heather using the hashtag walk-ons. For all the talk of rewarding scheduling, does the College Football Playoff Committee actually reward week schedules with New Year's 6 bowls? Take a look at Ohio State, Oklahoma State, Ole Miss, and Iowa.
Jason, no. There shouldn't be any assumption or interpretation that the College Football Playoff Selection Committee rewards anything that resembles a weak schedule, and the Big 12 can attest to that because of its recent move to require its schools to play at least one Power 5 conference. But here's what people need to understand is that there's a method to this madness when assigning the New Year's Six bowls. So first you do the semifinals, so you cross those 4 teams off the list. You have to remember that there are 2 contract bowls. The Sugar Bowl gets the Big 12 champion and the SEC champion. If they're in the semifinals, you go to the second, number 2 place team in the Big 12 standings and the next highest ranked SEC team. So you would have Oklahoma State, Ole Miss. So that's not necessarily about the college football playoff rewarding the schedules by any means. It's about filling a contract bowl. The same thing can be said for the Rose Bowl. Obviously, historically, the Big Ten champ against the Pac-12 champ. The Big Ten champ, Michigan State, is in the semifinals, so you go to the next highest ranked team, which was Iowa in this case. It could have been Ohio State, but it was Iowa. So then you match them up against Stanford because that's the Pac-12 champ. So then you have the Peach and the Fiesta Bowls that you plug in, and you go and you look at which teams are left, which are the highest teams, which makes geographical sense, fan interest, all of those things play a factor. It's not looking at the schedules in that point. There is a method to this madness.
Great explanation, Heather. Thank you for that.
Thank you. You bet.
Zubin, we got this one for you. Comes to us from Blake Schroeder, or maybe it's Blake Schrader. I don't know. Either way, his Twitter handle is @BlakeIsStupid, which once again goes to show there's no such thing as a stupid question, just a stupid Twitter handle. Blake says, who has the tougher job ahead of them in Florida, Mark Richt at the U or Scott Frost at Central Florida?
I'll tell you, Blake, I think this one's easy. It's an intriguing question. I think it's Richt. I mean, he's got a much more difficult job. Now, I guess it's easier to get into the college football playoff out of the ACC than it is the SEC, but the expectation level in Miami is off the charts. At UCF, they celebrate by drinking beers for teams that don't win games. They gave out 15,000 beers to soak your suds the way they lost. I think Frost is going to be a really good hire. Seems to make sense. He did a nice job with Oregon. He's got a good pedigree at Nebraska. But I don't know what the expectation level is at UCF. It's a huge undergraduate school. I was shocked to see how many people actually went there. Fertile recruiting area in Florida there near the Orlando area. Upside is big. Yes, 2 years ago they were in the Fiesta Bowl, but then they cratered to this year a season with no wins. So even when the heat is on, whatever the heat might be at Central Florida, even in their highest of moments, but that won't be the case at the moment considering they're coming off their lowest of moments, I think the heat and the tougher job is clearly ahead of Richt at Miami because I think they're dealing with a group of players and alums and a dwindling fan base and pilots flying banners that have unrealistic expectations for what this game is today. You could lump in Penn State fan and Nebraska fan in that same statement with Miami fan. I just think UCF can be turned around quickly. As I mentioned, they went from 60 to 0 in 2 years. It stands to reason with the right person they can go from 0 to 60 in another 2 years. So I think this is going to be a tough one for Richt. Much tougher.
Last one of the day is for you, Ivan. Comes to us from Victor Romero, who's at Victor Romero 55. Says, Ivan, could we see a football ACC Big Ten or SEC Big 12 challenge like we do in hoops for non-conference scheduling?
Victor, from your mouth to God's ears, I think it's a great idea. I think the logistics of it would be very difficult, and I'm not exactly smart enough to know why. I know basketball, they clear the decks early in December, and it seems to be easy to put those games together. Why they couldn't do it the first week or two of the season, I don't know. But football scheduling is such a science and an art, and there's hocus pocus involved, and I don't know what's I'm so confused about how they do it, but it seems to be so difficult. Part of it, I think, is some leagues only want to play conference games that want to play they want to front load all their non-conference games. Other leagues don't. The SEC is not a league that front loads it. They play conference games all season long. So, you'd have to have two leagues that have the same philosophy in that regard, and then pull it off. The other problem you have is I guess would be making the matchups, because they do games so far in advance, and everything else is contingent on that. If you've got a team, for instance, that's got only 5 home games and they need to buy a conference game to get their 6th, but the ACC Big Ten Challenge wants them to play on the road, or the ACC whomever challenge, then that screws up your matchups. It's just a lot more difficult. There's so many more things going on with college football and scheduling. It just seems like it'd be very hard to pull off, but I hope somebody figures out how to do it.
We've gotten a lot of good walk-ons questions recently. Keep them coming and keep on using the hashtag walk-ons.
The extra point.
Extra point time. Heather, take it away.
I think Will Muschamp is the most overrated hire of this offseason. I can't quite figure out why everyone is so excited and praising the hire of Will Muschamp at South Carolina. I was watching the SEC championship game and thinking, whoever's going to hire Will Muschamp, here it is. Here's his offense on the field, right here. I mean, what kind of an audition is that? He is undoubtedly one of the best defensive minds in college football. I agree with that 100%, but I have yet to see anything that indicates he's a terrific head coach. I think it was 4 offensive coordinators in 4 years. I just don't see him being the CEO of a program. I see him being an excellent defensive coordinator, and I just think that he's gotten way too much credit for being somebody who can just 3 days later go to another head coaching job. And the other thing is act like a grown-up on the sideline. I mean, we have an excellent thing on ESPN.com. It's a piece that shows the many faces of Will Muschamp. Check it out if you haven't seen it already. But hide your children, because it is scary. It's just some of the faces that he makes on the sidelines. It's just, come on.
Yeah, and he's 44 years old, and I think the saddest part, Heather, is it was a fait accompli that someone was going to hire him, right? I mean, it's just a matter of who it was going to be, and even though I think Auburn's defense got a little bit better as the season went on, I certainly do think that, it's all a relative thing. But I think you're right. It's just simply a fait accompli that someone was going to give him a second chance, and it didn't take him long to get right back on the wagon and become a head coach in the SEC. Remains to be seen what he will do. There's a lot of people, including Bill Belichick, that have done well in their second go-around. And by the way, I'm not comparing those two there. I'm just using that as an example. All right, Ivan, what do you have?
Well, before I make my point, I would just like to point out that after Heather answered her walk-on question, Josh congratulated her on her answer, and after my convoluted, mumbling, fumbling answer to mine, Josh really didn't have anything to say.
If you don't have anything nice to say, Ivan, you just don't say anything at all. Right?
Ouch! The bottom part of that.
So I'm going to go ahead and do my extra point, Josh, if that's okay with you.
Go for it. There's no promises of any compliments.
Actually, I want to piggyback on what Heather said, because the hiring of Will Muschamp is unique this year. 16 head coaches have been hired. Only 3 of them are head coaches who were asked to leave a previous job. And Will is one, and Mark Richt is one, and he was, he's certainly not damaged goods. And the other was Bill Cubitt at Illinois, who was the interim and was not really a reclamation project either. And my point is, in past years, we've seen guys who were pretty good coaches or very good coaches by their record get second opportunities or another opportunity to be head coaches. But this year, guys like Houston Nutt, guys like Mac Brown, guys like Rick Neuheisel that had some interest in being a head coach so far have been ignored. And I don't know what's going on, whether it's just the flavor of this year, whether it's it's a trend of some greater import, but there's still 4 head coaching availability, jobs out there. East Carolina, Louisiana Monroe, North Texas, and Toledo either have openings or interim coaches. And that's it'd be interesting to see if they continue that trend, and if we're onto something that's a change in the coaching business.
All right, guys, my extra point is on a group of people that are extremely powerful, yet not seen very much, and that leads you to think I'm probably talking about the College Football Playoff Committee, but I'm not. I'm actually talking about some of these executive search firms that are really holding so much power when it comes to hiring these coaches. As you know, this offseason already has been rife with so many changes at so many big-name schools, and a lot of good opportunities are popping up. I mean, there's a ton of jobs open as we expected. But one of the best-kept secrets is how places like the Parker Executive Search Firm or the Korn Ferry Firm are paid a ton of money by schools just to come up with a candidate list. Then it's up to those schools to winnow the list and hire somebody. Most of the time it works. Sometimes it doesn't. You just never know how people are going to be. But what's interesting is the line is being blurred. This used to be a point where you're simply asking these firms to line up a group of people. Give me the best candidates. But these firms have gotten so powerful now that it's not just lining up candidates. It's basically setting the agenda. They're the power brokers. It's not just the firms that have to be in with the coaches to know exactly how reputable they are. Now the coaches have to be in with the firms because the firms have all the power. They've gone from simply being a headhunter to being an absolute power broker. It's something you don't see often. It's something they're compensated really handsomely for, and it's something that for years has been changing the face of college football. All right. Busy show. Packed. Want to thank Phil Steele for his normal Thursday visit. Of course, thanking Ivan and Heather for being along the way today as well. On tomorrow's show, as we creep closer to Heisman Saturday, it only seems appropriate to have the only two-time Heisman winner with us tomorrow. The Buckeyes' Archie Griffin stops by the Championship Drive podcast. Look forward to that. Thanks for the download. Bino?
Again. Thanks for listening to Championship Drive. For more great podcasts, go to the Pod Center page on ESPNradio.com. And remember, ESPN is the home for the College Football Playoff. Notre Dame and Ohio State have 3 losses between them by a combined 7 points. 2 of the nation's best clash at the Battlefront Fiesta Bowl. Coverage begins New Year's Day at 1 Eastern on ESPN and on ESPN Radio.